He left me at the hospital thinking I'd stay silent. But the house, it was mine. The past, not buried. And the next knock on his door wasn't a courtesy. It was a reckoning, because this time I wasn't asking. I was evicting. They wheeled me to the lobby with a courtesy that felt more procedural than kind. The nurse who'd walked beside me hadn't asked if I had a ride, just assumed, as they all did. My chart said independent, so that's what they treated me as. Outside, snow fell in thick, wind-driven sheets. The parking lot lights made it glow, almost pretty. But inside the lobby, I sat in a wheelchair with a discharge envelope in my lap and a knot in my throat. I pulled my phone from the small overnight bag resting against my knees. The screen was smeared with fingerprints and old texts. I opened my contacts and hovered over Beck's name. Beck, my son-in-law, my daughter Kendra's husband of 8 years, reliable, practical, unshakable, and so often cold, though he'd never admit it. I pressed call. It rang 4 times before he answered. Yeah? Hi, Beck, I'm ready to be picked up. They discharged me about 20 minutes ago. A pause, then a sigh, not even veiled. Martha, I just walked in the door. It's been a hell of a day. Oh, of course, I wasn't sure if... Yeah, no, sorry, I can't tonight. Maybe you could call someone else. Someone else. Okay, I said softly. Thanks anyway. He hung up before I could say goodbye. I stared at the phone, my thumb still hovering above the screen. The nurse had already walked away. A janitor passed by, pushing a yellow mop bucket, not even glancing in my direction. For a few moments, I just sat there, the warmth of the hospital fading, the cold seeping in from the glass doors. My surgery had been minor, just a scope and some removal. But recovery was slow. My body ached. My hands trembled slightly. But more than anything, I felt embarrassed. I had asked for help, and it was denied. And worse, I had expected it to be. I told myself it was understandable. Beck worked long hours. He didn't owe me anything. Maybe I should have arranged a ride ahead of time. Maybe I'd been too passive. Maybe... The maybes always came like that, stacked one after another until they smothered the part of me that dared to feel mistreated. I wasn't angry, at least not right away. I was something else, something quieter, smaller, humiliated. I pulled my coat tighter around me and reached for my bag again, dialed the only cab company in town and waited on hold, listening to a tinny instrumental version of Somewhere Over the Rainbow. My fingers, still stiff, curled against the plastic handle of the wheelchair. Outside, a gust of wind lifted the snow into spiraling towers. I glanced at the reflection in the glass. The woman looking back at me was pale, older than she felt, with sharp lines around her mouth and tired eyes that had learned how to hide longing behind politeness. Kendra hadn't called that day. Not once. I knew she was busy. She always was. 2 kids, her job, the house. Beck kept her occupied, organized, directed. My daughter had stopped asking how I was years ago. Not out of cruelty, but because Beck had made it unnecessary. Or maybe she just learned not to look too closely. She used to braid my hair in the mornings before school. She'd tug too hard and apologize, kissing the crown of my head as if she could erase the sting. We hadn't touched each other like that in years. My husband Reed would have come to get me, if he were still alive. Reed had passed 5 winters ago. Quietly, in his sleep, with the television humming low in the background and a mug of cocoa gone cold beside his recliner. He wasn't a romantic man, but he never let me feel abandoned. That was something. My estranged sister Charlene hadn't spoken to me in 7 years. Not since I refused to take her side in the inheritance argument after Reed's funeral. We were different breeds of survival. She burned bridges. I learned to live under them. The cab arrived after 38 minutes. I stood slowly, legs wobbling, clutching my coat like it might hold my dignity together. The driver didn't get out to help. He just popped the trunk. I hobbled through the sliding doors and out into the storm, my boots slick against the salted concrete. As I slid into the back seat, snowflakes clung to my hair and melted down my cheeks. The car smelled like old coffee and pine-scented air freshener. I sank into the seat, silent. The driver asked for my address. I gave it. Home, the house Reed built. The one Kendra and Beck had slowly claimed room by room. I lived in the guest suite now. My choice, I had told everyone. My choice. But that night, watching the hospital shrink behind us in the rearview mirror, something broke open inside me. Not a shattering, more like the loosening of a knot. I pressed my palm flat against my coat and felt the steady, unfamiliar rhythm of resolve. Something had shifted, subtle but irreversible. I wasn't furniture, and I wasn't going to be forgotten in my own story. The storm had followed me home. It whistled against the windows and pressed snow into the corners of the porch. But the real chill was waiting inside. The house wasn't cold, not physically. The heat clicked on dutifully, the thermostat holding steady. But as I stood in the entryway, the weight of returning fell over me like another kind of weather. I closed the door behind me, brushing snow off my shoulders with stiff fingers. My bag thudded softly onto the floor. No one met me. No warm light in the living room. Just silence and the faint hum of the refrigerator beyond the kitchen. The stairs stretched upward like a dare. I gripped the rail and climbed slowly, my body still tender from surgery, my left leg dragging slightly. Each step echoed a memory I didn't want. Each one reminded me that no one had come to help. By the time I reached the landing, I was sweating through my coat. I paused outside the guest suite, my suite, and leaned against the doorframe, catching my breath. My name might have been on the deed, but this was no longer my house. Not really. I turned on the light and stepped inside. The room was clean, organized, a little too much so. I noticed the bed had been straightened, the pillows fluffed, my things neatly aligned on the dresser. Kendra had been in here, straightening, managing, ensuring the appearance of care. I sat down at the edge of the bed and let the pain wash over me. My hip throbbed, my lower back ached. But more than that, something deeper stirred. An old bruise that had nothing to do with my surgery. It wasn't about the ride. It hadn't been for a long time. Beck's cruelty didn't scream. It whispered, smiled, chuckled under its breath. The kind of venom that came dressed as dry humor and harmless remarks. That's not how Kendra likes her eggs, but nice try. Your mother's casserole could use a little flavor, don't you think, babe? Guess some people don't understand boundaries after retirement. The words didn't draw blood, but they sliced, little by little over years, until I had stopped bleeding and started accepting. And Kendra. Her silence was louder than anything Beck said. I remembered a dinner, 2 years ago. The roast chicken I'd made was dry. I'd overcooked it, distracted by a phone call. Beck chewed his food slowly, theatrically, then looked across the table with that smirk. Is it supposed to taste like this? He asked, chuckling. I mean, it's fine. I just didn't know cardboard was on the menu. Kendra didn't laugh, but she didn't stop him either. She took a sip of wine and looked away. I had smiled, nodded, said, maybe next time I'll let you cook. Even Reed, before he passed, never defended me during those moments. His way of managing conflict was ignoring it. Beck had slowly filled that vacuum, not with warmth but with control. The house bore his fingerprints now, the updated kitchen, his design, the den with the mounted TV and the leather recliner, his space. Kendra's touches were minimal, carefully curated. My things had been relocated years ago, but legally, it was still mine. Reed had left it to me in full. No contest, no trust clause, just my name, clear and final. I stood up, muscles screaming, and walked slowly into the hallway closet. The drawer was where I'd left it, third one down, stiff and jammed at the edges. I yanked it open, dust rising in little puffs. Inside, beneath old tax files and medical records, was the thin manila folder with our house documents. The deed was on top, crisp and authoritative, the ink as black as the day it was signed. My name, just mine. I stared at it. Beck's voice floated back to me from just a few weeks ago. We'd been in the kitchen, he making coffee, me unloading groceries. You know, your time in this house is almost up, he'd said casually, staring into the mug. Wouldn't it be nice to simplify? Maybe get you a nice place, smaller, easier to manage? I'd smiled then. I always did. I'm managing just fine. He didn't push that day. He never did. He just let the words linger, rot in the air like something sour. I pulled the deed from the folder and turned to go, but something slid loose beneath it. Another envelope, thick and weathered, tucked at the bottom. It wasn't addressed to me. My hand shook slightly as I lifted it. The handwriting was unmistakable. Reed's, neat, deliberate, the kind he used for official things. It was labeled simply, for Beck. I sat back down on the bed, the envelope in my lap, opened it slowly. The letter inside was short, plain, a few paragraphs, but every sentence pulsed with weight. Beck, if you're reading this, it means Martha's found the papers. Good. I want her to know. I know what you're doing, what you've done, the casual undermining, the controlling jokes, the way you've positioned yourself. You're not subtle. And while I can't stop you after I'm gone, I can make sure Martha has the truth. This house is hers, not because she needs it, but because she earned it. Every inch of it. Don't mistake her silence for weakness. One day, she'll remember who she is. And when she does, you'll be the one left packing. Read. My throat closed. I hadn't known he'd seen. I hadn't known he'd written this. I folded the letter carefully, placed it back inside the envelope. Outside, the storm had quieted. Snow clung to the window like lace. The silence wasn't so heavy now, not cold, just waiting. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel alone in this house. I felt seen. The attic had always been Reed's space, a low-ceilinged sanctuary cluttered with toolboxes, old books, and the remnants of projects never finished. After he passed, I rarely went up there. Too many shadows, too many things left unsaid. But the letter changed something. It wasn't just words on a page. It was a voice I hadn't heard in 5 years. A voice that had watched more than I thought, that had stayed silent long enough to fracture everything. And now, too late, it spoke. I stood at the base of the attic ladder, letter still in hand, heart pounding like a second clock. The pull cord swayed gently as if Reed himself had just gone up. I climbed. The air upstairs was still and dense. Dust bloomed with each step. The single bulb flickered once before staying lit. Cold radiated from the corners. Snow tapped softly at the narrow window pane. I lit a candle instead. Reed always said electricity in an attic felt unnatural. He preferred candlelight, warmer for the soul. I used to roll my eyes at that. Now I lit the wick and watched the flames settle before I opened the rest of the folder. There were more letters, 4 in total. One to Kendra, one to Charlene, one to himself, unfolded, unsent, half-written, and another again to Beck, longer this time. I unfolded it with care. Beck, you've always played the long game. You enter a room, size everyone up, and say just enough to earn trust, then take just enough to keep control. I watched you with my daughter, and it was there from the beginning. The possessiveness dressed as concern, the interruptions disguised as humor, the way you shut down her voice in public with a look. Kendra loves you, but I see the way you steer her words. I'm not proud of what I let happen in this house. Martha deserved better. But I won't let this place become your prize. I'm leaving it to her, fully, and I hope you try to take it, because then, maybe she'll finally see you. I folded the paper slowly. My fingers trembled, not from cold, but from memory. It wasn't a new pain, this quiet recognition of how Reed had watched without intervening. He hadn't been cruel, but he'd been absent in ways that still left bruises. When Beck started his slow occupation of our space, Reed didn't stop him. He nodded along, sipped his coffee, avoided conflict. But somewhere in him, he knew. The attic groaned beneath my weight as I paced slowly, back and forth between boxes of forgotten life. Candlelight danced across a dust-covered mirror, distorting my reflection into something almost unrecognizable. I saw her there, the woman who had waited by Reed's bedside every night during his last months, spooning soup into his mouth, adjusting his pillows, bathing his feet when he no longer had the strength. The woman who kept herself whole while her husband vanished inch by inch. Who let Beck make downsizing jokes at the wake because she was too tired to fight. The woman who never asked for more. I remembered Beck sidling up beside me at the funeral, his voice soft, feigning compassion. "Must be a lot to manage alone now," he'd said, eyes already scanning the house. "Maybe it's time to think smaller, more comfortable." I'd nodded numbly, clutching Reed's wedding ring in my palm, still warm from his skin. And Kendra, she hadn't said a word, just watched Beck speak for both of them. Now, as I stood surrounded by the quiet ruins of Reed's unfinished repairs and half-formed regrets, I understood something painfully clear. Reed hadn't protected me. He'd prepared me, left me with a trail of breadcrumbs, trusting I'd follow them when I was ready. It wasn't enough. It would never be enough, but it was something. The candle flickered as the wind moaned outside. The snow had started again, falling heavy, blurring the edges of the world beyond the attic window. I looked out into the swirling white and felt the silence shift around me. This house held so much: love, grief, control, compromise, and now clarity. I folded Reed's letter once more, then slid it into the pocket of my coat. I moved slowly through the attic, brushing dust from old photo albums, glancing over a dented toolbox, a jar of bent nails, a paintbrush stiff with age. Before I left, I blew out the candle. The smoke curled toward the rafters like a final breath. I locked the attic behind me, and for the first time since Reed died, I didn't feel like I was walking alone in this house. I felt like I'd been handed the last missing piece. I had worn so many roles in my life, I barely remembered the shape of myself beneath them. Wife, mother, caretaker, diplomat, hostess. Not once in all those years did I stop to consider if I had ever been the owner, not just of property but of space, of voice, of worth. Even when Reed was alive, he made it easy not to question. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't shout or belittle. But there was a structure, a hierarchy. It was understood that he made the decisions, and I arranged my life around them. His job, his needs, his timing, even his comfort. When we married, he told me he liked a quiet woman. I took that as a compliment. Years later, I understood it as instruction. I had followed it so well, I lost the sound of my own thoughts. Kendra was raised inside that quiet. I didn't mean for it to shape her like it did. But when silence is all a house knows, it becomes its own kind of music. She learned early how to make herself useful, how to mirror calm even when she ached. Her pain never came out in shouts. It came in deflections, tired smiles, distracted hands. We were never close, not truly. I wanted to believe we were. But our relationship had always been framed by what we didn't say. I hadn't told her what her father asked of me. I hadn't told her when Beck first made me uncomfortable. I thought I was protecting her. In truth, I was training her to endure. That morning, I tried something different. Kendra was in the kitchen, hair tied back, scrolling on her phone. The twins were at school. The air was thick with the scent of toast and overripe bananas. I stepped into the room and cleared my throat. She looked up. "Hey, Mom." I nodded. "Can we talk a minute?" She hesitated, but set her phone down. "Sure." I sat across from her at the table. My hands trembled slightly, but I kept them folded in my lap. "I've been thinking about boundaries," I began. Her expression shifted, subtle, wary. "I know things have been tight lately," I continued. "Tense, maybe. But this house is still mine. I've tried to stay out of the way. I've tried to keep the peace, but I need you to hear me now." "Mom," she started, but I raised a hand gently. "I need my space respected. My things left untouched, and I need Beck to understand that." As if summoned, he entered the room, coffee in hand, shirt half buttoned, smugness always fully intact. Did I hear my name? Kendra went still. I saw it. The way her shoulders tensed, her voice vanished. "I was telling Kendra," I said, voice steady now, "that this is my home. And that matters now." Beck let out a low, dry laugh. "Okay, sure. We all know it's your name on the deed. You don't have to keep reminding us." "I haven't been reminding you," I said. "Not once. But I think it's time I start." He tilted his head. "Is this about the hospital ride? Martha, you're taking that way too personally." "No," I said, pushing my chair back and standing slowly. "This is about years of you treating me like I'm a guest in my own life. That ends now." He blinked, lips parting slightly. Kendra looked between us, her face unreadable. No anger, no shock. Just the realization that something had shifted. Something that wasn't going back. I left the kitchen, heart thudding. I didn't need their permission. I went straight to my office, sat at the desk, and for the first time in my life, I called a real estate agent. Her name was Diane. She answered on the third ring, warm and professional. "I'm not sure what I want yet," I told her, "but I'm ready to start looking." When I hung up, my hands stopped shaking. That night, I couldn't sleep. Something in the house felt unsettled, the kind of silence that doesn't soothe, it slinks. I turned on the hallway light and walked to my office just to check. The door was ajar. I always left it closed. The drawers were undisturbed, nothing missing. But something felt off. I checked the small motion camera I'd installed above the bookshelf months ago, not because I expected anything, but because Beck had a way of forgetting boundaries. And I'd wanted insurance. I pulled up the footage, clicked through the timestamp. There he was, 1:13 a.m., entering quietly, glancing over his shoulder, opening the drawer, lifting the folder, photographing the deed with his phone, then slipping out again. He hadn't even bothered to close the door behind him. I watched it twice, then again. Then I sat back in my chair, stared at the screen, and smiled for the first time in weeks. Because the line had been drawn, and this time, I was the one holding the chalk. The first thing I did was change the locks. It wasn't about security. Not entirely. It was about ownership, about making the door open only for those I invited, not those who assumed their place. The locksmith came quietly on a Thursday morning. No fuss, no questions. By noon, the keys were different, the weight in my pocket no longer symbolic. Next, I revoked Beck's access to the shared utilities, canceled the joint Amazon account, shut down his saved access to the thermostat, removed his voice command from the smart TV. Small changes, quiet ones. But in this house, silence was never neutral. And silence that shifted? That was war. The first sign of Beck's anger was subtle. He banged a little harder when closing a cupboard, left muddy footprints on the hallway rug, said less at dinner. Then, 2 nights later, it boiled over. I was in the kitchen, wiping down the counters when he stormed in. "You changed the locks," he said. No greeting. I didn't look up. "Yes. You canceled my logins." I rinsed the cloth slowly. Also true. "Jesus, Martha, what is this? You going senile, or are you just trying to stir up drama?" I turned to face him then, calm, still, like a candle that wouldn't flicker no matter how much he huffed. "This is me reclaiming what's mine." His laugh was sharp, bitter. "Reclaiming? You live in a guest room." "And yet," I said, reaching slowly for my phone, tapping the voice recorder, "I own every square inch of this place." "You're turning on family," he hissed. "After everything we've done for you." My voice didn't rise. "What have you done for me, Beck? What have you ever done that wasn't for yourself?" He stepped closer. "We've waited long enough for this house." And there it was. I stopped recording as his words hung in the air, unguarded, too sharp to be pulled back. He saw my phone in my hand and his face blanched. "You recorded me?" I stared at him, not blinking. "I did." "You manipulative—" "No," I said, "not anymore." He left the kitchen in a rush of heat and rage, footsteps pounding up the stairs. A door slammed, then silence. A silence that didn't feel oppressive. It felt earned. I stood there, letting the moment settle. A few minutes later, Kendra entered quietly, like she'd been listening from the hallway. She held a tea towel in her hand, twisting it the way she used to twist her hair when she was a girl. Her eyes were wide, watery. "I heard," she said. I nodded. She leaned against the counter and the tea towel dropped from her hands. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I should have said something. So many times, I didn't know how." I didn't interrupt her. I thought if I kept quiet, he'd stop. I thought he loved me, that he was just stressed, misunderstood. Her voice cracked. "I didn't know how to love him and defend you at the same time. I thought I had to choose." I walked over slowly, wrapped her in my arms. She didn't resist. Her shoulders shook. Her tears hit my collarbone like little drops of guilt, hot and long overdue. "You don't have to choose," I murmured. "Not anymore." We stood like that for a long time. The kind of long that untangles years. Later that night, when the house was still, I sat in my office, played the recording again, every word a stone in the foundation I was finally building for myself. Then I composed an email. Subject, evidence, property threat, attached the file. Added a short note. "Please review and advise next steps. I'm ready." I hit send. And for the first time since Reed's funeral, I felt like a woman who wasn't surviving. I felt like a woman preparing to win. The signature was mine, written in thick black ink across the closing documents, neat and final. I didn't hesitate when I signed them. My hand didn't shake. My pen didn't pause. It was the same signature I'd used on birthday cards and school permission slips and bank checks for 40 years. But this time it felt different. This time, it meant freedom. The house was sold. I'd chosen the buyers myself, a young couple with a 6-month-old baby, all wide eyes and nervous laughter. They'd walked through the place slowly, touching the banister like it was something sacred. They loved the kitchen. They said they could see themselves growing old here. I didn't tell them everything the walls remembered. I didn't have to. I just made sure they would write better stories in these rooms than we ever had. The notice went out the next morning. Certified mail, tracked, delivered with legal precision. Beck was on the lawn when it arrived. I stood at the window, coffee in hand, watching through the slit in the curtain. The mail carrier handed him the envelope. Beck glanced at the label, tore it open right there. His face moved in slow motion, smirk to confusion, confusion to rage. He looked up at the house like it had betrayed him, like the bricks themselves had turned on him. Kendra sat in the passenger seat of their car, unmoving. She didn't get out. She didn't look at him. She just stared straight ahead, hands folded in her lap like she already knew. He stormed toward the front door, but didn't knock, just paced. Then turned back to the car, shouting something I couldn't hear. His voice was muffled by the double pains, by distance, by the years he spent talking over women who no longer had any intention of listening. Kendra never looked at him. Eventually, he drove away. I didn't wave. I didn't even smile. But inside, something steady rose up from my chest and settled behind my ribs like armor. He thought I was furniture, but I'm the foundation. Later that week, the house emptied around me. I moved through it slowly, room by room, touching walls, brushing dust from corners. Each space echoed a different memory, some sweet, most not. Laughter that had come with strings, dinners that ended in silence, mornings filled with restraint. I walked through the master bedroom, once Reed's, now long stripped of identity. Through the den where Beck had planted himself for years, remote in hand, shoes kicked off like it was his kingdom. Through the kitchen where I'd cooked meals with a smile I'd trained myself to wear. Now there was nothing left of them here, only the smell of fresh paint and the promise of someone else's life. I met the new couple on the porch. They smiled nervously, keys in hand. "I hope this house brings you peace," I told them. The wife reached out and touched my hand. "We'll take good care of it." I believed her. I walked down the steps with my coat wrapped tight and my head high. 1 week later, Kendra showed up at my door. She stood on the porch with a single suitcase and eyes rimmed red. No makeup, no excuses, just the truth. "I left him," she said quietly. I stepped aside without a word and let her in. She sat on the couch, still in her coat, her hands shaking. "He screamed for hours. Said I'd betrayed him. Said I was siding with you. But I checked. My name was never on the lease. Not on the car. Not on the account." She looked up, finally meeting my eyes. I was living in a life I never actually owned. I didn't tell her I knew how that felt. I just reached out, and this time she didn't pull away. We sat together for a long while. And outside, for the first time in years, the wind passed the windows without pressing to come in. We didn't speak the first night. Kendra curled up on the far end of the couch with a blanket over her legs and her gaze fixed on the television, though it wasn't on. I made us tea. Chamomile because it was all I had in the cupboard. She held the mug with both hands but didn't drink it. I didn't ask questions. She'd talk when she was ready. It took until the second morning. I was folding laundry at the kitchen table when she spoke behind me, quiet as a dropped pin. "I haven't felt like a person in years." I turned slowly. She was still standing near the doorway, her robe hanging loose, her hair unbrushed. "I used to call Charlene every weekend," she continued. "We'd talk about books, protests, boys, everything. Then Beck started asking questions. 'Why do you let her talk like that? Don't you think she's a little unstable?' And at first I thought he was just looking out for me, that he saw something I didn't. I pulled out a chair. She sat. He kept saying she was getting into my head, that she was trying to turn me against him, that all that feminist garbage she pushed would ruin us." Her voice shook. She clutched the mug like it might keep her together. So, I stopped calling her, and when she reached out, I ignored her. I ghosted my own aunt, because Beck convinced me that loyalty to him meant silence to everyone else. I reached across the table, laid my hand over hers. She didn't move. "I missed her every day," Kendra whispered. But it was like every time I tried to reach out, I'd hear his voice in my head telling me she was toxic, that he was my family now. That blood didn't mean anything unless it was on his terms. I remembered Charlene's last phone call, the way she'd shouted through tears, "You're choosing comfort over truth," and how I'd hung up, angry at her tone, rather than asking what hurt she was hiding underneath. I hadn't heard from her since, until that afternoon. It started with a knock. I opened the door and there she stood, Charlene, all denim and silver jewelry and 2 loud earrings, her arms crossed like a shield. She looked older, but unchanged, fierce in a way I'd never learned to be. "I heard what happened," she said without preamble. "I figured now's as good a time as any to stop being strangers." I stepped aside. She walked in like she belonged, sat at the kitchen table, took in Kendra's hollow posture and said, "He never deserved either of you." Kendra started crying again, and Charlene didn't flinch. The 3 of us sat on the porch that evening, tea again, this time with honey and peppermint leaves Charlene had brought from her garden. The sun was low. The light cast everything gold. Kendra's voice cracked as she stared out over the lawn. "I forgot what my voice sounds like." Charlene reached out, touched her knee. "It's not gone. It's just waiting." We talked for hours. About the subtle ways control masquerades as love. About the women in our family who were praised for being quiet, for being agreeable, for keeping the peace. About how peace built on silence is just a slower kind of war. I admitted the truth out loud. I had failed to protect my daughter, not because I didn't love her, but because I thought endurance was love. That survival was strength, that boundaries were bridges too risky to build. But now I knew better. We made a pact before the sun dipped below the tree line. To speak, even when it hurt. To listen, even when it challenged us. To reclaim something joyful. That night we planned a trip, just the 3 of us. A cabin upstate, near a lake Charlene had loved as a girl. A long weekend with no men, no roles, no obligations. Just women, just voices, just us. The box was tucked behind old tax returns and a yellowed binder labeled Lake House Renovation. I hadn't looked there in years. I might never have looked at all if I hadn't been searching for a tea kettle Charlene remembered from a childhood trip. But there it was. Another envelope, then another, each marked with a name. One read, Charlene. I stood there in the guest room closet, stunned. My hands trembled as I pulled the letters out. Reed's handwriting, steady, measured, almost too calm. I carried them out into the living room like they were something fragile. Charlene was there, barefoot, sipping coffee and reading one of Kendra's old poetry books. I handed her the envelope without a word. Her face didn't change as she turned it over. Just a slight pause. Then she opened it. We read in silence, side by side on the couch, the light falling through the blinds in thin golden strips. He wrote with guilt and fear. "Charlene, you were never easy, and I mean that with respect. You questioned everything. You made Martha uncomfortable sometimes because she didn't know how to fight back and you didn't know how to stop fighting. But I watched you. I watched what Beck did to her, to Kendra. I saw it happening like a slow leak, and I didn't say anything. I thought I was keeping the peace. I thought men like him didn't last unless you gave them something to hold on to. I was wrong. You warned us. You were right. I don't know how to fix what I failed to stop, but I hope one day Martha finds her footing, and if she does, I hope you're still close enough to catch her." Read Charlene's lips pressed into a line as she folded the letter. "He always talked around the truth," she muttered, "but he saw it." I nodded slowly. "He watched me sink. And he handed you towels," she added, voice bitter. "Not a rope." We didn't cry. We didn't collapse into forgiveness. We just sat there, 2 women holding the weight of a man's half-finished remorse. "I'm angry," I said finally, the words sharp and sudden. "At him, at me." Charlene turned. "You should be." I kept telling myself he did the best he could, but maybe the best isn't always enough. Maybe silence is a choice. It always is. We stared out the window. Kendra came in later, sat on the rug at our feet. She picked up the letter Reed had left unfinished, the one written to himself. It was barely legible, full of cross-outs and second guesses. What kind of legacy do you leave when your hands were never truly clean? She read it aloud, her voice small. "We were all just women trying not to sink," she whispered. I took the last letter, the one to me. I had read it before, held it close, forgiven it more than once. But this time, I read it again under a new lens, saw the evasions, the apologies shaped like praise, the confession that still asked to be loved. And then I stood up, walked to the fireplace, lit a match. The letter curled slowly in the flames, ink bleeding before it burned, paper whispering its last breath into ash. It wasn't about hate, it was about release. I couldn't keep dragging a dead man's quiet guilt into my healing. I needed space, I needed truth louder than legacy. The fire ate the past quietly. That evening, I felt a weight lift that had no name. But peace doesn't always come gently. It came in the form of a notification on my laptop, an email, no sender name, just an address I didn't recognize. The subject line, notice of intent to pursue legal action. I opened it. Beck, claiming emotional damages, displacement, defamation, financial instability due to unlawful eviction. He'd attached screenshots, photos of the deed, an old message Kendra had sent asking me to be patient with him. His tone was polished, full of self-pity. He wasn't just trying to reclaim space, he was trying to erase consequence. But I'd already burned the past, and I wasn't backing down now. The courtroom was colder than I expected, sterile, almost clinical. Light poured in through high windows, illuminating dust motes and uncomfortable truths. Beck sat across from me in a charcoal suit too sharp for the occasion, lips pursed, jaw locked. His lawyer whispered urgently in his ear, but he didn't turn. He kept his eyes on me as if daring me to flinch. I didn't. The judge was a woman in her 60s, silver hair pulled back, voice crisp with authority. Beck's argument was concise and performative. My client was displaced from his living arrangement without adequate notice. He experienced emotional distress and financial instability. Furthermore, the abrupt sale of the home, one he shared with his mother-in-law for nearly a decade, was done with malicious intent and clear disregard for familial obligation. It was polished, precise, empty. My attorney stood next. She handed over documents, deed copies, proof of ownership, footage of Beck snooping in my office, the recorded conversation, and then I took the stand. I didn't dramatize. I asked for respect, I said plainly. Repeatedly, I was denied. I acted within my legal rights and finally my personal ones. Beck's lawyer objected to the phrasing. The judge overruled her. Then it was Beck's turn. He took the stand with the air of a man expecting sympathy. He recounted years of family contributions, moments where he supported the household, vague references to sacrifices. And then his voice trembled, just slightly. She turned everyone against me. The judge leaned forward. You lived in a home you did not own, contributed to expenses you never documented, and were asked to leave only after repeated boundary violations. And you believe you were wronged? He faltered. I just thought, that's the problem, she interrupted. You thought entitlement was equivalent to ownership. Beck's mouth opened, closed. He said nothing. Kendra was the last to speak. She took the stand quietly, her hands folded in her lap. My mother gave up her voice to make peace. She stayed quiet so I wouldn't be caught in the middle. And I mistook that silence for weakness. I was wrong. Beck didn't look at her. Kendra's voice cracked once, just once, when she said, she earned her space back, every inch. The judge ruled within minutes. Case dismissed. No damages, no compensation, no more Beck. He stormed out of the courtroom, red-faced and alone, shoving the heavy door open with too much force. The echo swallowed him. I didn't look back. Outside, the sky was soft with spring. The air smelled like thawed earth and tulips. I stood on the courthouse steps, breathing it in. For the first time, there was nothing behind me I needed to return to, and everything ahead was mine. The cottage wasn't big. Just 2 bedrooms, a porch with chipping paint, and a kitchen that smelled like dust and possibility. But it was ours. The day we moved in, Kendra and I stood in the empty living room with our arms full of grocery bags and an antique floor lamp from a secondhand shop. We didn't speak for a minute, just took in the blank canvas of walls and windows and what felt like, finally, a beginning. We filled the space slowly, new furniture, bright rugs, a table that didn't creak when you leaned on it. We set rules without realizing it. No silence unless it was restful. No apologies for existing. No questions too uncomfortable to ask. Kendra enrolled in therapy 2 weeks after we moved. Her voice cracked when she told me, "I need to understand why I accepted so little." I nodded. We both do. I started writing again. Not letters, not journals, a memoir, not for publication. Not yet. Just to get it all out. 30 years of suppressed feelings, rewrites of moments I had once explained away, dialogue I'd swallowed until now. Each page was a reclamation, each chapter another step toward clarity. We painted the kitchen together, soft yellow like sun butter, then the living room, deep green, grounding, the porch we saved for last. We hung string lights, planted rosemary and lavender in old tin cans, and bought a creaky wooden swing that made us laugh every time it leaned too far left. We made new rituals: pancakes on Sundays, quiet tea before bed, evening walks around the block with mismatched scarves. Kendra laughed again, cautious at first, like joy was a language she had to relearn, but it came back louder each time, until one night she laughed so hard she cried, and I cried with her, because finally, it felt safe to feel everything. Words spread somehow about our journey. A neighbor asked me to speak at a small women's group. Afterward, one of the women hugged me tight and whispered, "Thank you for naming what I couldn't." That night I opened a P.O. box. I didn't expect much. Maybe a note or two from women who wanted to write without fear. But the letters started coming. Slowly, then steadily. Stories of silent homes and invisible hurts. Of women pushed to the edge and finding their way back. Stories not so different from ours. I read every one. Some I responded to. Others I just held for a while before filing them into a binder marked unheard. But here. Then one envelope came. No return address. Just a single line on the back. "Your sister's daughter." My hands shook as I opened it. The letter was written in neat, careful handwriting. Young, but clear. "You don't know me. But I think you knew my mother once. Her name was Elise. She didn't talk about her family much, only that her sister left when they were young, and there was someone she used to trust but shouldn't have. His name was Beck. He told her things, promised her help, and when she got sick, he disappeared. I think he did more than that. I'm trying to piece together what happened. I think you're the only one who might want to help. Your sister's daughter." I sat there with the letter in my lap. The lights dimmed, the porch swing creaking behind me. Charlene never mentioned Elise had a child, but I knew, the moment I read that signature. Beck wasn't just a chapter we had closed. He was a thread tangled deeper than any of us realized. Sarah was already waiting at the diner when I arrived. Just a booth by the window, a chipped coffee mug between her hands, eyes scanning the street like she was always ready to run. She was 19, maybe 20. Big coat, two big eyes, the kind of posture you only learn from years of trying not to take up space. I recognized her before she waved. Something about her felt too familiar. She stood when I reached the table. "Mrs. Emery?" "Just Martha," I said. We sat. She didn't touch her coffee again. "I almost didn't come," she said, "but I didn't know who else to ask." "You did the right thing." She nodded, then unfolded a paper, creased from folding and unfolding too many times. On it were notes, a timeline, names. Beck's name circled 3 times. He met my mom when she was working temp jobs, said he could help, said he had connections. She was proud. She'd just gotten clean. Sarah's voice cracked but didn't break. He kept showing up, first with groceries, then money, then guilt. Said she owed him time, trust. I didn't speak. He told her she was better when she didn't think too much, that people like her got hurt when they asked too many questions. I closed my eyes briefly. How many times had I heard him say something like that? How many women had he coaxed into silence under the guise of care? Sarah reached into her bag and pulled out a photo. A woman with tired eyes and a soft smile. Elise. She looked like Charlene if you tilted your head. The same defiant chin, the same quiet fight behind the eyes. He was in our lives for 2 years. Then she got sick. He ghosted. We found letters later, things he'd written her, controlling things. She slid them across the table. I read each one. My stomach twisted. One line stood out. "You're not built for independence, Elise. People like us, we need structure. Let me be yours." Sarah watched me closely. "I think he ruined her," she said, "before the illness did." Back at the cottage, I shared everything with Charlene and Kendra. We sat at the kitchen table, the 4 of us. Sarah's fingers curled around her tea. Charlene leaned back in her chair, fury written in every bone. Kendra stared at the letters, mouth slightly open. "He's been doing this for years," I said. "And we let him." Charlene's fists clenched. "I should have said more when I first saw the way he looked at Kendra, the way he touched your counters like he owned them. I should have said more when he told me what kind of woman I was allowed to be," Kendra added. Sarah's voice came last, quiet, shaky, but steady. "We can't change what happened, but we can stop pretending it didn't." The air in the room shifted. It felt like truth, raw and heavy, but also like something else. Power. "We name it," I said, looking around the table. "We end it." 4 heads nodded. We weren't victims in that moment. We were witnesses. We were builders. And we were done letting the story write us. The trees around the cottage were strung with paper lanterns, each one a little flicker of warmth against the slow blue of dusk. The air was soft with late summer. Fireflies blinked between the branches, and laughter floated out through the open windows like music. 1 year. It had been exactly 1 year since Beck walked out of that courtroom, and 1 year since we stopped being afraid of our own voices. The cottage had grown into itself. Kendra's garden was thriving. Parsley, tomatoes, lavender bending with bees. The porch swing had been sanded and repainted. Inside, the walls were covered in small frames, handwritten quotes, Polaroids of our trip to the lake, a photo of the 4 of us with wind-blown hair and wide smiles. Tonight we were hosting a gathering, not an event. Nothing public, just women. Some were friends. Others came through letters I'd received over the year. A few had driven hours to be here. The invitation had been simple. "Come as you are, come when you're ready." Charlene wore her signature red lipstick and a denim jacket covered in enamel pins. Kendra had baked cinnamon bread, her apron dusted in flour. Sarah sat cross-legged near the fire pit, her eyes scanning the gathering like she couldn't believe she was part of something safe. There were mason jars on every table, each holding a tiny folded note, 1 note per woman, each one an anonymous truth, a wound named, a survival marked. I watched as women opened them, tears, nods, a quiet kind of reverence. Charlene cleared her throat. "We've been taught that pain should be private, that survival should be silent, that voicing harm is more disruptive than harm itself." She held up her jar. "I say, let's disrupt." Applause broke, brief and real. I stepped forward then, holding my own note. I hadn't written it for the jar. I'd written it for myself, for this moment. "I was silent too long," I read aloud, "but I'm not voiceless anymore." There was no cheering, just a quiet hum of breath, a collective inhale of shared truth. We didn't toast with champagne. We used cider, sharp, warm, honest. No flutes, just mismatched mugs and glasses from the thrift store. As the stars came out, one by one, we lit the fire pit. Laughter returned. Someone started humming. Someone else braided Sarah's hair. Someone told a story that made us cry in the best way. It wasn't about healing all at once. It was about not healing alone. When the guests began to leave, there were hugs that lasted a little too long and promises not to disappear. I watched them drift down the gravel path, lantern light bouncing on shoulders, backs retreating into the dark like fireflies disappearing into memory. Inside, the house was quieter again. Charlene curled up on the couch with a glass of cider. Kendra took Sarah's hand and said, "You were never the problem. You were the evidence." Sarah smiled, tired and safe. I stepped onto the porch, the wind soft against my face. The trees swayed like they remembered, and in that moment I didn't feel triumphant. I felt certain that I hadn't been discarded. I had walked out, and this time I took the door with me. If this story stirred something in you, if you've ever sat in silence when you should have been seen, you're not alone. These stories matter because you matter. Stay with us. The next voice we raise might be yours. And we're just getting started.